Good afternoon. Tom Clonan is my name. I'm an independent senator in Leinster House, and I'm also a parent and a carer. I have 4 adult children, 25, 23, 21-year-old daughter, and an 18-year-old. And my 23-year-old son, Eoghan, has a rare neuromuscular disease called Pelizaeus-Merzbacher disease. So I just want you to know the context within which I'm here to speak to you today about connections. So I wanted to talk to you about cultural connections and then, the connections between the political and the personal. So, I'm very sorry. In a previous life, I was an army officer in the Defence Forces in Óglaigh na hÉireann, and I did a doctorate. And I looked at the experiences of my female colleagues in the armed forces. And at the time, there were very discriminatory policies in place, which created a hyper-masculine culture within our armed forces, which really wasn't, it didn't match the skill sets and the requirements for an organization to defend a diverse population against internal and external threats. So some of the explicitly discriminatory policies as they applied to women included orders like, women were not permitted to wear trousers. They could only wear skirts. Female pilots were not allowed to fly an aircraft if there was a weapon on board. So we had really experienced search and rescue pilots who were flying aircraft off the west coast of Ireland in, storm force conditions over the Atlantic, winching injured sailors off trawlers and other vessels. And those really, really skilled pilots were not allowed to fly aircraft in the aid to the civil power role in armed support operations for An Garda Síochána along the borders, simply because they were female. Now, I know there are a lot of researchers in the room, but I don't believe that there is any research in aviation that shows that in order to fly an aircraft with a weapon on board, you must have a penis. I really don't think so. So it was cultural. Now, unfortunately, my research showed that there were really, really high levels of systemic and systematic sexual violence against my female colleagues. And that I interviewed 60 women of my colleagues, a maximum variation sample. 59 out of the 60 reported some form of discrimination, sexual harassment, sexual assault, including rape. Now, when I reported these findings, and this again speaks to the connection between active discrimination, misogyny, sexism, and the negative suboptimal outcomes for people. When I reported my findings, I was accused by the military authorities of fabricating the findings, of falsifying the research, and of breaching the Official Secrets Act, which is a criminal offence. So I experienced what is now termed reprisal. So not only, even when the science and the logic showed that these discriminatory practices were in place with all of the suboptimal outcomes, there was huge resistance and pushback from broader society against the idea that difference could be constructed not in a negative way, but that difference could be constructed in a positive way. So I speak to that because of the connection between the broader culture and its legislative framework or its rules and its guidelines and the suboptimal outcomes for people who are constructed as different. And when that difference is constructed as deficiency or problematic or an issue. I also forgot to say there is a connection between Ireland and Canada. Canada has only once ever been invaded, and that was by the United Irishmen, I think around about 1800. And the idea was these United Irishmen based in the States, they thought if they invaded Canada, they could hold it to ransom against Britain and get Ireland's independence back as a sort of a reward. You can Google this and check it, it's true. The Canadians didn't tolerate this very well, and I think the invasion lasted something like 4 hours. And I also know that the Canadians came in that period, they were annoyed with the Americans, and they crossed the border and they burnt the White House down. I don't know if you knew that. Oh, that they would do it again. So yeah, don't mess with the Canadians. So in terms of connections then in the political, I was elected because myself and my son Eoghan, as an act of resistance or protest, we ran for election on the university panel, the Trinity College Dublin panel. And the reason why we did it is because, and please don't tell other people who might be would-be candidates, is that it is free of charge. Don't tell anybody. All you need is 12 signatures. Please don't tell anybody that. So we got our signatures, we ran for election, we did it as a protest and got elected in 2022. And I was re-elected. I'm very grateful for that constituency in January of this year. So I've learned a lot about the legislative space that we live in. So in line with the discriminatory practice, like there was a direct causal link between the discriminatory policies and practices within the armed forces and the negative outcomes and the abuse that were life-altering and life-limiting for female soldiers, sailors, and aircrew. There is a direct causative link between our legislative frames and our experiences as a community. So in political terms, I've discovered Ireland is the only country in the European Union that does not have rights-based legislation to give disabled citizens socioeconomic rights. We're the only country in the European Union that does not have that. England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, they've had that legislation for over 30 years. The United States has the Americans with Disabilities Act. So we exist in a polity that is inherently and explicitly ableist. In Ireland, we're outliers. Why? Maybe in the Q&A we could discuss that. Now, if you look at the legislation that has been brought recently by our current government, in the last Dáil term, they introduced the Disability Green Paper on Reform. Now, this was an absolutely horrific green paper, I'm sure you're familiar with it, within which it was suggested that the government would compulsorily medically examine 250,000 Irish citizens who are on disability allowance. Now, I did the maths on that. They said that they were going to compulsorily medical examine us as a community once every 5 years. To do that for 250,000 people would mean that you would have to medically examine 1,000 disabled citizens every week. 52 weeks of the year. And we are a community, many of whom can't get medical appointments for interventions. We have children at CHI being taken off the wait list for urological interventions, for spinal surgery interventions, who are becoming de facto, I hate to use the word sterile, whose reproductive organs are not allowed to be developed properly for want of very minor surgical interventions. And here we have a government that introduces an idea of a legislation to compulsorily to take that medical resource that should be used to empower us and assist us, to categorize us in terms of our capacity to work. What a Victorian, deterministic, explicitly ableist function. So that is the polity we live in. In relation to the referenda, the care referendum, the government got advice from the Attorney General and from the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform and Finance to come up with a wording that would explicitly deny disabled citizens any constitutional right to care supports from the state. So the wording of the care referendum was to give constitutional expression to the idea that the family would be the primary, if not exclusive, provider of care in society. There is a connection between our political culture and the situation that we find ourselves in as a community, with all of the suboptimal outcomes that we experience, from on the medical side, from lack of interventions, therapies and supports, right across to homelessness, isolation and enduring poverty. We've one of the lowest participation rates in the OECD. We actually have the lowest participation rate in the OECD for disabled citizens in the workplace. So let's be really, really clear. In the political sense, we are outliers. We are living in an ableist apartheid state. And we need to be really, really clear about that. Now, Ireland has signed up and fully committed to the UN Convention on the rights of persons with disabilities. That's a positive step. But notwithstanding that, having signed that legislation, or signed up to it, including the optional protocol, the government has still gone on to introduce legislation that is explicitly ableist. We've just had a budget that has left our community €1,400 worse off than we were before the budget. That has increased poverty for disabled citizens. For my part, I've introduced legislation for disability rights. Now, the week before last, I managed to get a disability rights bill through all 5 stages in the upper house. Now, that's a bit of a thank you. The government, there's 60 senators in the upper house. The government have a majority of 40-20. It is almost unheard of for an opposition party to get a bill through all of its stages. I don't know that an independent senator has ever gotten a piece of legislation through all 5 stages. And one of the reasons why I got it through was because at the second stage, the debate stage, the government senators rebelled and indicated that they were going to break the whip. Now, that's how we got it through. So I know that within our political community, there is the potential for change. So my disability rights bill is there. I hope to progress that through the Dáil. The Minister will be here later this afternoon. I will be looking for meetings with her, with Minister Norma Foley, with Minister Emer Higgins, but more importantly, I'll be looking for a meeting with Micheál Martin and Simon Harris. He's our new Minister for Finance, because the centre of gravity of resistance against our rights is coming from public expenditure reform and finance, because they see our rights as a cost unit. It's the most extraordinarily offensive and oppressive lens through which to view our community. So that's the political connection. My disability personalised budgets bill, I introduced it on the 25th of June this year, which would give all of us the right to control our own budgets and to be empowered and autonomous and to live a life as described by our keynote speaker, where you live independently and autonomously in your own home with your personal assistants. Not that you live at home with your parents, as is the case with us, until your parents die or go into crisis, and then you end up being placed in a nursing home, of which there are almost 2,000 younger people with disabilities inappropriately placed in nursing homes, just in the Dublin and Greater Leinster area. When I introduced that legislation, Micheál Martin and Simon Harris issued an instruction that it be struck down for 18 months. So make no mistake about it, we inhabit a political space which is explicitly racist. And in relation to the reprisal I experienced exposing the causal relationship between a toxic culture and negative outcomes for women, there is pushback against our, if you like, desire and our right for these fundamental human rights. The last thing I want to talk about is personal connections. We are all here because of a chromosomal change. We are all part of the same family. We're all in the club, one way or another. And the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities mandates parents and carers. It doesn't just give us permission to or ask us to, it mandates us to speak to the experience of disability. We're all in this together. And what drives me crazy is that as a community, across the full spectrum of difference, whether it be so-called intellectual difference or neurodivergence or physical impairment, whatever you want to call it, we should have the most powerful political community in this country. But we are fractured and fragmented, and there's terrible disunity within our community. And I think if we could just all come together, and I get great inspiration from the LGBTIQ+ community, from other advocacy groups, for the manner in which they mobilize the public will and the political will to get things done. We have to move to a fundamental rights-based approach. We need to change the social contract and the power difference that exists between us and, I'm not going to bore you to tears. We all know, we all fight on a week-to-week basis, whether it's the HSE, the Department of Social Protection, whether it's finance, revenue, whoever. We need to change that power relationship to one that goes from charity to fundamental human rights. And we can do that through our interconnectedness, through our connectivity, so that our citizens, and we will all be disabled. World Health Organization tells us that every human being will become disabled at some point in their life. An average of about 8 years of your life, you live with a disability. For a lot of us, towards the end of life. But as you said, joining our ranks, whether it's by acquired brain injury, stroke, road traffic collision, coming off a scooter with no helmet on, who knows? But we need to get together and absolutely be a loud, radical, noisy, and provocative and adversarial voice for change, because the incremental approach is not working. Certainly our experience as a family over the last 20 years, particularly since austerity and the crash, has been an objective deterioration in the circumstances of living with a disability. And we can do better. Ireland should not be the worst place in the European Union to have a disability. Ireland should be the best place. We should be world leaders. And I hope any united Ireland, whatever that looks like, is going to happen in our lifetime. It's on the political horizon, that disability rights should be front and center. We need to go from being an ableist state, which we are, to being one that is completely diverse and empowering for all of our citizens, because it will empower each and every single one of us. Thanks for your patience. Thank you.